They were hunted, mistrusted, and branded with myths that never belonged to them. Yet they carried one of the oldest surviving stories on Earth. For centuries, the world called them Gypsies. But the real history of the Romani people is not a legend. It is a trail of vanished kingdoms, shattered borders, and faith carried in exile. This is not a romantic tale of wanderers. It is the record of a nation uprooted from India, pushed across empires, speaking a language that still remembers where home once was, and guarded by a secret that powerful societies chose not to understand. Every road they walked preserved fragments, songs, rituals, prayers, warnings. And when Europe wrote its history, their chapter was left in the margins. Tonight, we open that sealed page, because if one peoples could be misunderstood for 1,000 years, what else have we mistaken about the past? Let us begin with the first journey. For centuries, Europe repeated the same mistake. These are Egyptians, desert magicians, strangers from the land of the Nile. Even their English name Gypsies comes from that era, Egyptians. But the truth does not speak with an Egyptian accent. When linguists finally listened carefully to Romani speech, they heard something shocking. Not Arabic, not Coptic, not Greek, but echoes of Sanskrit. Words for bread, for sun, for village, for metal, all tracing back to North and Northwest India, to regions like Rajasthan and Punjab. The people called Roma are not children of the pyramids. They are children of the subcontinent. Even their name hides a memory. Roma Romani is closely linked to an older term, Dom or Doma, a caste of traveling musicians, metal workers, and performers in ancient India. Not kings, not priests, but artisans, entertainers, bearers of stories and skills. Then, around 1,000 years after Christ, something broke. Kingdoms in northern India fractured under invasion and war. Armies pushed in from the northwest empires like the Ghaznavids, tearing through cities and trade routes. In the chaos, artisans and low-status groups were the easiest to uproot, taken as camp followers, craftsmen, sometimes captives, or forced to flee ahead of the storm. What we later called Gypsies did not wake up one morning and decide to wander. They were pushed. Their road west runs like a scar across the map from India into Persian lands through Armenia and the Byzantine Empire across the Balkans, and finally into a Europe that barely understood its own borders. Along the way, their language gathered layers like sediment, Persian words for trade, and coin, Greek words for the church and the market, Slavic words for forest and winter. But underneath, the Indian heartbeat remained. By the time medieval chroniclers noticed them, the Roma arrived not as conquerors, but as survivors. Europe saw strangers at its gates. Heaven saw exiles carrying the memory of a lost homeland, much like Israel by the rivers of Babylon, singing songs no one else understood. Today their descendants are scattered in Bulgaria and Hungary and Romania, and Spain and Turkey and Brazil, across the Americas and beyond. The map looks random. The story is not. Because the hidden beginning of Romani history is not crime, not curse, not superstition. It is exile. And if their footsteps began in India, the next secret is written not in geography, but in something even more intimate. The words they speak, the blood they carry, and the legends they refuse to forget. If the road out of India explains where the Romani came from, their language whispers who they remained. Romani words for brother, bread, son, and faith trace back to the Indo-Aryan family, a linguistic root shared with Sanskrit and ancient Prakrit. But woven through it like threads of another color are Greek words from Byzantine markets, Slavic terms from forests and winters, Persian vocabulary from trade routes and caravan life. A language built while walking, and yet it never lost its Indian heart. Empires rose and disappeared while others rewrote borders, but the Roma kept carrying their vocabulary like a portable homeland. They did not rule history, they remembered it. Then, science added its own testimony, one that no prejudice could erase. In 2012, genetic studies compared markers across Romani communities from dozens of countries. The results shocked Europe most, descended from a single founding population that left India roughly 500 years ago. Different flags, different passports, different local names, yet beneath the surface a shared origin pulsed like a buried drumbeat. The myth of mysterious strangers collapsed. This was not a wandering myth. It was a displaced nation. If their roots are so clear, why do Romani families sometimes have pale skin, light eyes, even blonde hair? Old stereotypes tried to explain it with legends, stolen children, cursed bloodlines, supernatural transformation. But the truth is far simpler and far more human. Centuries of marriages, alliances, adoption, and survival shaped them. Like a river absorbing tributaries, the Romani people adapted without losing themselves. Diversity was not a contradiction. It was evidence of endurance. Across camps and towns, they carried stories about exile, cleverness, and divine protection. In some, God rescues the wanderer. In others, justice comes slowly, but it comes. Their theology grew out of the road, much as biblical faith once grew beside desert tents and Babylonian rivers. Exile in Scripture does not mean abandonment. It means learning who you truly are when the world tries to name you something else. And so the Romani story mirrors ancient Israel. In one haunting line, they lost, but they did not disappear. A quiet pause invites itself here, not of pity, but of recognition. What else in history have we misjudged simply because we never stopped to listen? If you feel a strange echo rising while you hear this, let it become more than a passing thought. Leave your reflection as a marker in the journey, not for argument, but for memory. Here we do not merely watch stories. We help keep them alive, so silence does not bury them again. Now, return to the path. Linguists and geneticists can chart maps and timelines, yet they cannot explain one mystery: how a people scattered across continents still recognize each other without needing a border or a king. Identity for the Roma was never written in marble. It was carried in songs, rituals, names whispered over children, and a sense difficult to describe. Impossible to erase, that exile is not the end of a people unless they stop remembering. Language proved their origin. DNA confirmed the journey. But the soul of their story still lies ahead, hidden in the rules, customs, and sacred boundaries that held their world together when everything else fell apart. And that is where we go next. In next part, we step inside the camp and discover a society the outside world thought it understood but never truly saw. Step inside a Romani camp past the fires where pots simmer and stories settle into the night, and you begin to see something the outside world never understood. This is not chaos, it is order wrapped in movement. At the center stands the extended family. Authority does not descend from palaces or courts, but from memory embodied in elders. And often, it is the older women who carry the deepest moral weight. Their words are not shouted. They are simply obeyed because they have walked farther through loss than anyone else. Marriage arrives early in many traditional communities, not as romance alone, but as alliance, identity, and survival. Dowry, honor, reputation. These are not empty customs. They are currency in a world that never trusted them. And yet slowly, surprisingly, many Romani families have begun reshaping these customs, negotiating with modern laws, schools, cities, proving that tradition is not a prison, but a living conversation. Then we reach the rule outsiders found most strange and most revealing. Marim, the law of purity and impurity. It governs childbirth, washing, cooking, illness, and death. Clothes for the upper body must never mix with cloth used below the waist. The spaces where food is prepared must not be contaminated by anything connected to bodily functions. Visitors once mocked this system as superstition. Marim arose among travelers with little medical help, living constantly on the road, exposed to disease and danger. It quietly taught hygiene, distance, and caution centuries before modern sanitation. Beneath ritual language, you find wisdom, a fence built to protect a fragile people. Belief here was not fear-based. It was protective theology, a statement that the body, the family, and the table mattered too much to be treated carelessly. And then comes a striking break from their Indian past. Among most Romani communities, the dead must be buried, not burned. This stands in sharp contrast to many Hindu traditions of cremation. Why the change? Exile rewrote their imagination. Burial meant continuity, place, memory. A grave marks that a life counted, in a world that constantly told them they did not belong. Placing loved ones gently into the earth became an act of resistance and faith. Theology shifted, not in temples, but in travel. Their God, however named, however imagined, became the one who sees wanderers not from a distant throne, but from the dust beside the road. Even the bright fabrics, the necklaces, the coins stitched into headscarves carry meaning. To outsiders, it looked like flamboyance. To the Roma, it was archive. When libraries and lands were denied, memory had to be worn color as history, sound, as identity ornament, as testimony. We are still here. A people judged for centuries by surface appearances had been all along creating a portable culture of astonishing depth. What the world condemned as excess was in truth preservation. And yet, everything you've seen so far, the families, the laws, the symbols existed for one urgent purpose: to protect the soul of a community constantly under threat. Which raises the next question, and it is not an easy one. If their traditions were shields, what or who were they defending themselves against? We enter the realm of faith, fear, and misunderstood rituals, where religion, mystery, and accusation collided, and history rarely told the story fairly. When the Roma entered new lands, they did not arrive with armies. They arrived with instrument skills and a willingness to adapt. And so, their faith did something remarkable. They prayed in the languages of the people around them: Catholic in Spain and France, Orthodox in the Balkans, Muslim in parts of Turkey and the Middle East. But beneath those outward forms, a deeper rhythm survived, an older spiritual intuition shaped by India, the road, and the constant need for protection. Their songs carried hints of devotion and lament that feel as ancient as psalms, yet as restless as the desert wind. To medieval Europeans, that mixture looked suspicious. Fortune-telling blessings, warnings, charms. Outsiders saw curses. They imagined witches, dark powers, hidden conspiracies. But step closer. Many of those gestures were not about controlling fate, they were about coping. A mother whispering the blessing over her child before a dangerous journey is not invoking darkness. She is begging God, however she names him, to notice. What was condemned as sorcery often turned out to be symbolic language born from fear, hope, and the trauma of never being safe. Still, the stigma stuck. Priests wrote warnings. Officials issued bans. And slowly, Europe learned to associate Romani spirituality with danger, even when the real threat came from prejudice, not prayer. Then comes an uncomfortable truth many people miss. You can live in a Romani household, speak the language, adopt the customs, and still never fully be considered Romani by blood. Identity here cannot simply be signed on paper. It is inheritance, memory, lineage, the story spoken around the fire and passed from elders to children. In a world that constantly tried to erase them, guarding identity became an act of survival. Over and over in Scripture, the people at the edges, Ruth the foreigner, the Samaritan traveler, the exiles under Babylon, end up carrying the truth when kingdoms forget. They are not always powerful, but they remember. The Romani story joins that chorus. Standing outside walls built by others, they became witnesses not because they sought holiness, but because history forced them to live where illusions die. If faith belongs only to the successful, the settled, the socially accepted, then what do we do with a people whose entire theology was forged on the margins? If somewhere in your own life, you know that feeling not quite belonging, yet refusing to vanish, then you are not far from the Romany heart. Share it if you wish not to argue, but to recognize the pilgrimage we often walk without noticing. And here is the question we now have to face. If faith shaped them, why did the world so often answer their prayers with chains, laws, and silence? In next part, we step into the darkest corridors of their history, where suspicion turned to persecution, and survival itself became an act of defiance. History books often skip this part or compress it into a single footnote, but for the Romani, it lasted centuries. In the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, many Romani communities were legally enslaved. Families were owned by monasteries, nobles, and the crown. Children could be bought or traded. Marriages were controlled. Freedom was not assumed. It was a rumor. Elsewhere in Europe, suspicion hardened into law. Edicts ordered them to leave within days or face execution. They were branded, mutilated, driven into forests, hunted as if belonging to no nation, no king, no god. And slowly, a myth took root that the Roma were destined to be outsiders, as if exile were not inflicted, but deserved. Then came the 20th century and the darkness deepened. Under the Nazi regime, racial science falsely declared the Romani undesirable. Families were rounded up, transported in cattle cars, starved, experimented on, gassed. This catastrophe has a Romani name, Porajmos, the devouring. Hundreds of thousands perished. Many died unrecorded because a world unwilling to see them in life also failed to count them in death. The moral shock is unavoidable. They were not punished for what they did, but for who they were. And yet, astonishingly, the story does not end in despair. Across camps, across winters, across borders that opened only to push them out again, the Roma turned memory into survival. They sang their grief into minor scales, taught their children proverbs of cunning and courage, and turned mourning into stories you could carry without a suitcase. Their faith shifted from triumph to endurance, a theology of breath. If we can sing tonight, then history has not erased us. Music became the sanctuary no government could close. Dance became testimony. Laughter, stubborn, uninvited, became resistance. In this way, their narrative quietly echoed the prophet's hope, not as fantasy, but as the stubborn belief that cruelty does not get the final word. They were accused of belonging nowhere. But that accusation, repeated long enough, forged a paradoxical gift. They learned to belong everywhere. On roads, in markets, on the edge of towns, they discovered that identity need not depend on walls. Home could be carried, remembered, rebuilt again and again. The world tried to erase them by scattering them, and instead created a people fluent in survival across continents. What society sought to exile, God quietly preserved, not by removing suffering, but by giving them a story strong enough to outlast it. And now a deeper question rises. If persecution shaped them, what has it taught them about power, justice, and the fragile line between safety and fear? We turn from the past to the meaning behind it and ask why history kept their voices quiet and what happens when those voices finally begin to speak. By now, the outlines are clear. A people uprooted from India, a language stitched together across continents, a faith shaped by exile, danger, and endurance. So why did their story disappear? Because they possessed none of the tools that usually carve a nation into memory. No kingdom, no army, no stone monuments declaring victories and kings. In medieval Europe, the chronicles were written by monasteries, courts, and rulers, those with territory to defend and reputations to preserve. The Roma had neither. They lived between borders, not inside them. Their archives were oral. Their history traveled in songs, genealogies, and warnings whispered to children. And when history is written by the settled, the wandering often vanish. It is not a conspiracy. It is something more subtle and more dangerous. Societies recorded what served them, and those who did not fit the story simply slipped out of view. Silence was mistaken for absence. Lack of documents was mistaken for lack of civilization. Yet, silence does not mean nothing happened. It means we did not bother to listen. Today, new disciplines have started to fill the gap. Historical linguistics maps their journey from India, across Persia, Byzantium, and Europe. Genetic research traces shared ancestry that unites communities separated by oceans. Records from monasteries, courts, and travelers reveal glimpses of their lives, sometimes cruel, sometimes admiring, always incomplete. And most importantly, the voices of Romani elders themselves are finally being recorded before they disappear. The buried chapter is being read, not written for them, but recovered with them. When we place all these fragments together, a more honest picture emerges. The Romani were not mythic tricksters drifting outside history. They were part of it, shaped by empires, enslaved by princes, persecuted by modern ideologies, and yet refusing to vanish. And here, theology offers one last unsettling lens. Scripture consistently reminds us that God hears those. The world ignores the sojourner, the widow, the refugee, the exile. Not because suffering makes them sacred, but because injustice reveals what our systems truly value. If the Roma were forgotten, it says more about us than about them. Their survival becomes a quiet rebuke to every version of history that measures worth only by power. They show that memory can exist without monuments, identity can endure without borders, and truth can outlive the pens that refuse to write it. What we call hidden history is often simply history seen from the wrong seat at the table. The Romani story is not about mystery as entertainment. It is about a people who carried light through centuries of suspicion, light woven into music, law, family, and faith, and refused to surrender it. Their path is still marked with struggle. Prejudice has not vanished. But their presence across the world testifies to something stronger than exile, a determination to exist, to remember, and to be seen at last. And so, as the silence finally begins to break, another question stands waiting, not about who they were, but about what we will choose to see when forgotten peoples step back into the story. We have walked a long road tonight, from an exodus out of India, through fragments of language and DNA, across laws, faith, persecution, and survival. It was never a fairy tale. It was a memory carried through centuries, quietly insisting that dignity does not vanish just because history forgets to write it down. As this video closes, the story does not end. It lingers in questions and empathy, in the way we choose to see those who live at the edges of our maps. If this journey stirred something in you, I invite you to like this video, share it, subscribe, and leave a comment with your reflections or questions. Your voice helps uncover the histories that silence once tried to bury. And stay with us for the next investigation, where forgotten texts and hidden peoples reveal what the past still refuses to say aloud. Because sometimes truth does not disappear. It simply waits for someone willing to listen.